And welcome to Bulls Trek Media, soon to be renamed Bulls Trek Live, as soon as I get off my ass and finally change the logo and get some artwork done.
Well, welcome. Thank you again for having me.
And got something exploding here. There we go. Okay. So I am back once. Oh, you're welcome. So we're picking up where we left off literally 6 months ago.
Yes. It's been a wonderful 6 months for me, and I hope it's been good for you in whichever ways it can be classified as wonderful.
Well, it's been busy. YouTube has been royally jacking me around with the main channel. So I'm going to try doing something a little bit different. I tried this 6 months ago. So we'll see how it goes. And I'm just going to fix the live stream here for a second. So, Chris.
Yes.
So just briefly, again, remind everybody of who you are and so forth, and then we'll proceed.
Well, sure. My name is Chris McKeon, and a few years ago I wrote a charity novel called Time's Champion. That was at the time, the only, not the only existing, but one of the earliest stories to deal with a few things. The Sixth Doctor's regeneration, the Colin Baker's Doctor's regeneration. That had been dealt with a little bit, but my story was the first really to delve into the identity and origin of the character of the Valeyard from the Trial of a Time Lord season of 1986 in Doctor Who. And so that connected me a little bit with various parts of Doctor Who fandom. And so I'm not a massive name, not at all, in Doctor Who, but people might, if they were aware of the book at the time, or if they know about the Valeyard, they might recognize my name. I don't have much of an online presence these days, but I am currently involved in making these non-profit Doctor Who audios for a specific purpose, which is to commemorate, at least right now, some of the actors who have passed that were involved in Doctor Who's classic era. Specifically, very specifically, to celebrate their centennials. So I'm doing a story right now called The Final Game, which was the originally intended final story for Roger Delgado's Master in the 1970s in the John Pertwee unit era, to celebrate Roger Delgado's centennial, which was last year, but we've been in production since last year, and we're currently working on the final edits. A couple other centennial stories is one for Peter Butterworth, who was the original monk, the first Renegade Time Lord in Doctor Who, called The Misshapen Planet. So it's the third story, the third meeting between William Hartnell's Doctor and Peter Butterworth's monk, of course with different actors. And also a story called The Veiled Memory, which is now the centennial, which we hit yesterday, for John Pertwee's Doctor. So those are some of the things that I'm doing right now, while also going to school and about to graduate from Utah Valley University in computer science. So, but in Doctor Who sense fandom, that's what I am. That's who I am. And I have listened to lots of things in the media about the current state of Doctor Who, and that's how I connected with you, because a lot of people, I think, will agree, as I do with you and others, that Doctor Who right now is not only not at its strongest, but I think in definite danger of a terminal decline. So that's why we've been talking.
Yeah. Oh, that's putting it mildly. And so just saying hi to everybody in the chat. I'm not expecting a lot of viewers, mainly because this is not my main channel, and this channel has been dormant for about 6 months. So sure. The only people that we have here are, well, those that saw it on Twitter. But I'm going to try and build this channel up. It's going to become my live streaming channel. I'm going to try and do a few live streams this week. I've got Tharis and Noel from the TARDIS Zone probably later this week as soon as we figure out a time. And yeah, Noel was saying there was a long pause. Google Hangouts was glitching out on me. I think I've fixed that. Anyway, so we're here with Chris, and make sure I get your name right again, with McKeon.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
If McEwen is easier, go ahead.
I'll just call you Chris.
Sure.
We've got 15 watching now. Let's see if we can break some records and get this all the way to 30.
Nice.
11 likes, and 4 dislikes, which came before I even started the stream.
Mhm.
So that, well, I already have a pretty good idea of who that was, and I really don't care. Um, yeah, so I guess we'll start kind of where we stopped. So we're going to be covering a few subjects, and just so everybody knows, we're only going to be going about an hour and a half today, mainly because I have to duck out at 2:30 because I have a work meeting at 3, non-YouTube related. So, Chris, where we stopped off last time, so Doctor Who in decline.
Yes.
Now we could say this for really most major science fiction franchises. Now, Doctor Who, nobody cares. Star Wars, the lack of interest in Episode 9 is absolutely hilarious, and I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that it might perform at solo levels.
Yes.
Um, I don't know if we talked last time. Are you a fan of Star Trek, Chris?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Absolutely.
well, Star Trek is effectively dead.
Mm.
That'd be another topic for another video altogether, but specifically Doctor Who. So we
Yes.
were talking about this 6 months ago, and I think it's even more so now. Would you say the view that nobody cares about Doctor Who at this point would be true, at least New Who?
Yeah, I think so to a certain extent because well, not many, but a few years ago, certainly in the RTD era, and I would say even a ways into the, not all the way, but a ways into the Moffat era, a lot of people were talking about Doctor Who amongst some of my friends and even amongst the general public. There was a sense that it was what was once niche and obscure was now fashionable to enjoy, which is Doctor Who. And so a lot of people enjoyed it. It was water cooler talk, and it was something that people would bring up casually. It used to be something that I would bring up, and then other people were bringing up. Now, in general, now it's not brought up too much amongst people that I know, or amongst people that are fans that I know that still had a lot of optimism and hope for Series 11 before it came out, as did I, in the sense that I like to be an optimist. And I didn't want to automatically say, oh, it's terrible because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, maybe Jodie Whittaker, or it's a female doctor, or Chris Chibnall. And I thought, well, let's see what they can do. I had some reservations, as I discussed, mainly because of some of the immediately prior stuff that Chris Chibnall did, mainly Broadchurch Series 3. I had some problems with that series and its tone and how it treated men, to be honest.
But I didn't make it past the 3rd episode.
No, and you didn't miss anything. And like I said, remember, we talked about that. Series 3 of Broadchurch was, in my opinion, quite anti-man. Now, maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but it seemed that way. And I wasn't watching it going into the series saying, let me look for what's anti-man. I just thought, let me enjoy this. And I thought, this is not enjoyable. So I had concerns.
And I will admit, I was a fan of Broadchurch for the first season, not so much the second. Although Chibs also tried launching it in North America, there was Grace Point with David Tennant with an American accent and Anna Gunn from Breaking Bad. Mm-hmm. It completely flopped. But it's almost like Chibnall was a one-trick pony, and I don't know, maybe it's after that he completely went over the edge when it comes to the identity politics. But when I saw Series 3, which is around the time that he was announced as the new showrunner, that's when I started to become concerned. And then when I saw the gender swap, which was not being done for narrative reasons, it was being done for ideological reasons, that's where I got concerned. And I was calling it out 2 years ago. This is where it's going to go, and it's exactly where it went.
Yes, and so yes, to circle back to your question, and then state something else. Yes, I went into Doctor Who Series 11 with concerns, but not earth-shattering concerns. They were concerns, but not destructive. After watching Series 11, my concerns were probably just as bad as yours. In fact, worse. They were realized, and I realized this series is being pushed is now being produced not simply for entertainment. And I believe that entertainment and acting can change the world. I believe that it can affect people. I think of myself watching the Silurians as a young child and being affected by that story and the unanswered question of who was right in defeating the Silurians and destroying the base, the Doctor or the Brigadier. So it can affect a person. Good entertainment and in my opinion, subtle storytelling, and even sometimes very pointed storytelling, but storytelling that leaves you asking the questions and trying to come up with your own answers. When I saw Doctor Series 11, what I saw was not subtle storytelling at all. What I saw was, I will put it this way, a pushback argument that I have heard in defense, and I appreciate it, but a pushback argument in defense of Series 11, or in the sense of its politics, not what its politics are, but the fact that it has politics, is that Doctor Who has always been political. In my opinion, that is not the case. This is not the case. I feel that Doctor Who, like Star Trek, to a certain extent Star Wars, but I would say the best American equivalent is Star Trek, has always been topical, meaning that it discusses and analyzes and discusses current or even timeless archetypal issues and topics in humanity in a way that all people can understand and they can draw their own conclusions. So I feel that Doctor Who has at the least often and perhaps always been topical. Political, in my opinion, means that a group, a television series, is no longer discussing the issues, but is trying to decide the issues. It has taken a stand on its own ideology. It has taken an ideological stance on issues and is trying to state this particular stance, this particular viewpoint is correct. I feel that we saw this in stories such as Being Honest, Rosa, where it depicted all of the Caucasians in the episode as horrible people, and there was no variety. It was quite, in my opinion, you could argue racist in that way. We saw this in the Arachnids in the UK with the character of Robertson, in that he was a surrogate for Donald Trump, and it treated him horrifically. Whatever you think about Donald Trump, it's a distraction from the story. In fact, I would say the main story was practically a sideshow and almost pointless, because the thrust of that episode was this man, like Donald Trump, is horrible. And I think it was also it could be interpreted almost as a slap in the face of America. And I'm an American, so it stung a bit. And there were other people that I knew at the time that watched that episode and said, that episode, and I'm not saying anyone's pro or anti-Trump. Some of these people were anti-Trump. But they were saying to me as Americans, that episode was very hard to watch because it seemed very anti-American. Other episodes, too, perhaps even stuff like Demons of the Punjab or the Witchfinders to a certain extent. I will tell you one thing about the Witchfinders that I didn't like, in terms of an ideological stance, that actually made me yell a little bit, was when the Doctor had been announced as a female, but Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker and others had been saying, but we are not treating her as a female, we are treating her as simply the Doctor. So I took comfort with that, saying, oh, well, the Doctor will still be the Doctor. In the Witchfinders, there is a moment where the Doctor says, paraphrasing, talking about women's situations in that particular era, the Renaissance era, but King James I, not Renaissance, but post-Renaissance. But the point is, she said, "Oh, women have it. This is such a hard time for women. We have it so hard. We have it difficult." And I remember yelling at the screen, "Who are we? Are you not the Doctor, or are you a woman? And now is your viewpoint now as the Doctor now an ideological stance of loyal and more partial to women's views? When the series has been, when the series creators and main actors have been saying this, don't see the Doctor as a woman, see the Doctor as a Doctor. Well, the Doctor is speaking now, saying that she is a woman. So is that excluding now a male viewpoint? There are many other things that I could say, but what I am saying in a nutshell is, I feel that the terminal decline of Doctor Who now is fairly maybe baked in the cake, because it has taken an ideological stance, and it's worn that ideological stance nakedly. So by saying that Doctor Who has always been political, in my opinion, is a tough thing to say. Is in my opinion a very. I don't blame the people that have said that. Some of my friends have said that. I don't blame them for that. But these are some of the friends that have been only watching Doctor Who for the last couple of years. And so if their viewpoint is that Doctor Who has always been political, their history is based on only what they have seen. And it's not always been the case. I feel that, like I said, Doctor Who has always been topical, but not political. It has always discussed the problems. It has not always taken a side. An example, very quickly, John Pertwee's era. Some people will cite Doctor Who being always political. They will cite some of the later John Pertwee stories because they dealt with quite strong topics at the time, political, you could argue, topics, such as like the Green Death with ecology, or Invasion of the Dinosaurs with the sense of bringing about Operation Golden Age, or restoring the planet's, again, ecology, let's say, more loosely. In the Green Death, why I think it's topical and not political is not everybody who has the same political viewpoint of the situation. Joe Grant sees the use of oil and petroleum and fossil fuels and such as a terrible, even immoral thing. So let's say the left-leaning point of view. When the Doctor and the Brigadier come into the room early on in that story, she makes her views very plain. She rants, and she says, "Don't you think it's a problem?" And the Brigadier says, and it does not treat him as a buffoon, as some people might think, but it does not treat him as a buffoon or as a bad guy. She says, "Joe, don't you think that your use of oil and fuel is a more immoral?" And he says, "Don't you see the problem?" And he says, "No, Miss Grant, I can't. Cheap petrol and plenty of it, just what the world needs." So he takes the more quote-unquote right-wing view. And the Doctor doesn't take any view. He just kind of maybe is a little amused and leaves. Also, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, when Mike Yates turns against UNIT and is stating that he is helping to bring about a golden age. He's taking a very ideological viewpoint. In fact, an extremist viewpoint. And of course, his other UNIT colleagues stand against him and saying, "No, we don't want this." The Doctor comes into it and says, "I understand what you're trying to do, Mike. In fact, in many ways, I sympathize. I want the world to be a clean place and idyllic for everybody and kind. But you can't bring about change in this way. You can't force your ideology upon other people and take away their choice to believe what they believe and live their own lives." And I feel that that's almost a forgotten idiom, a forgotten way of being, which is allow people to live, teach them correct principles, and let them govern themselves. And that, I believe, has been lost in current Doctor Who, because you won't hear the Doctor saying that now. In fact, I can't imagine Jodie Whittaker's Doctor saying that, or any of her companions, or anybody else that's quote unquote a good guy in the episodes. They're going to say this is the right way, this is the way to go. And anyone else that doesn't feel this way, as you saw in It Takes You Away, with the single father, Eric, I believe was his name. I can't remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he states what he's done, which I don't think was a good thing to do, leaving his daughter behind, even though it violated the logic of the story to be able to enable him to do what he did, passing through the anti-zone multiple times without problems. I almost took it as an ideology, or at least a particular position, and everyone piled on him, the Doctor, Grace, and not Grace, but the other companions. The Doctor rails against this single father, and the other two companions say, "I want to hit him."
And the whole context of the situation, what they missed in that episode. Okay, so abandoning your child is, we're all going to agree that that's unacceptable. Although she was a teenager, so it's not like he was abandoning a 5-year-old, but no. That's beside the point. The idea was there was no empathy towards the father's situation, or even understanding where, okay, this was someone who was deeply traumatized, probably suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. His wife had passed away. Here he is thinking that his wife has come back. So nowhere in the episode did I see any empathy shown towards that. And I think the crux of the issue, and I said this in a few videos back around 2015, 2016, when Moffat started to take the political road.
Yes.
It's not that politics in television or entertainment is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it becomes bad when it doesn't allow the audience to make their own decision. Now, Star Trek, especially the original series and into the Next Generation, they excelled at this, where they would present modern day issues, from within the metaphorical representation of science fiction.
Yes.
But it never outwardly lectured to the audience or said, you have to take this one point of view. And the problem is, if a show like Doctor Who, and I somewhere I'll find the video, but I said this in 2015, if you take a hard political stance and write off the other side, whether it be from the right or from the left, you will alienate half your audience. Mm-hmm. And from a marketing success standpoint, that's one of the dumbest things you could do.
Can I briefly
interject? Go ahead, Chris.
Can I briefly interject and say, when you mentioned Star Trek, I was thinking last night about a good example of that, and think of the episode late Series 3, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield.
That's actually the one I was thinking of.
Well, then I think it's wonderfully prescient, or at least pertinent to what we're discussing, which is a lot of people will think of that episode if they haven't seen it or maybe casually have seen it as, oh, it's the racist, it's the deal with racism, and it is the dealing with and racism is bad, yes, but then not taking a side, or at least taking a more nuanced approach. You have the two characters played by Frank Gorshin and I can't remember the man, Anthony. I can't remember the other man's name, but Beale played by Frank Gorshin, and the other character's name is Lokai. Beale essentially being quote unquote a racist, a supremacist, or a segregationist, whatever, and then the other man, Lokai, being a freedom fighter of sorts. The reason why that episode is quite good in being nuanced and dealing with that situation, as it was at the time in the late 60s. So very much of its time, but perhaps timeless in how these issues are discussed, is that it's easy to say, oh, Beale is the bad guy because he is the racist and the segregationist. But there is a moment where you deal with Lokai, who throughout is equally unlikable and aggressive and bellicose as Beale.
Yep.
There is a moment where Captain Kirk is sent, where Beale says, where Lokai says, I have fought against this man and my followers, and they've been wonderful idealists in fighting against these people, and they've died in fighting against people like Beale. And Captain Kirk says, you seem to have survived very well for leading a bloody campaign, essentially. Saying, well, if your people are like you and you are such a righteous man, why aren't you dead? If your situation is so dire and so dangerous and others have died, why are you still alive? It reminded me of the first X-Men film, where Magneto is stating my cause is so wonderful, and Wolverine says you're full of garbage. I don't swear. If you were really so righteous, it would be you up in that thing, meaning the machine where Rogue was placed to make everybody a mutant, knowing that it would kill her. Magneto says, "Oh, I am a righteous man, but I'm going to spare myself death." Nuanced approaches to very difficult things, where it's easy to take one side and say one side is totally evil. Sure, that side might be totally evil. But is the other side that is approaching the ideology totally good? It might be. But it's too easy to say it's totally good when you often have in humanity and human nature people that fail, even when they're trying to do something good. And if it gets to the point where the ideology discards life, those are harder, more nuanced issues to discuss. The point is, that's the mark of good drama, when you deal with topical issues or even political issues. And if you can deal with it in a balanced way, where you include everyone into the discussion and are grateful to have everyone in the discussion, even the people with whom you might disagree, this is good drama. Doctor Who has gone from topical to maybe even political, in my opinion, to ideological, in that they are actively taking stances and actively saying, the people that disagree with us, and you saw this in the real world, and you see it in the television the context, the episodes themselves, but certainly in the real world, when people had issues with it, and the BBC or its surrogates or other media-related figures essentially chastised and browbeat and shamed anyone that disagreed, and said, if you don't like this, you are not a proper Doctor Who fan, therefore, good riddance, we don't want you. Well, then who do you have left? Who do you have left to watch the series if you willingly and willfully and gleefully jettison maybe more than 50% of your audience? So say a quarter of the audience absolutely disagrees with you ideologically. You say, we don't want this quarter. Well, then what about the other quarter that maybe that quarter that's gone, they were their friends, or they maybe half the time agree with them? Do you lose them? And then what about the other quarter that even if they just more or less disagree, they look upon what's happened to the fandom with shame and disgust, saying, I don't want to be a part of this. And what if you're left with only you wanted to get rid of a quarter of your audience, and you're left with a quarter, or you're left with less?
Well, even long-term fans have given up. I know it's been mentioned a few times in the chat, but the Who addicts who have been around for 6 or 7 years, which I've been fans of pretty much since the beginning. I've done at least one live stream with them. Mm-hmm. They announced yesterday that they are no longer doing Doctor Who, or they're not focusing on Doctor Who. It's going to become a gaming channel. And we're seeing the ripple effect, because we're now 6 or so months removed from the New Year's special. Uh-huh. So what we're seeing now is even long-term Doctor Who fans, there's a sign of complacency. Yeah. I worry about a company like Big Finish, which I've been a subscriber to Big Finish for almost 20 years.
Hmm.
Even a company like Big Finish, which is the voice of traditional Doctor Who fans, uh, they're completely reliant on profitability, and they've sidestepped a lot of this. They in their extras, they don't even talk about the new series.
Yeah.
So to long-term Doctor Who fans, to the legacy of the classic series, and really the first at least three Doctor eras, well, the RTD and maybe the first half of the Moffat era,
Hmm.
they've done damage to parts of Doctor Who that are not even associated with the current thing, because the entire brand has been damaged. When
Yes.
you think Doctor Who now, you think, okay, ideological, I'm going to be lectured to.
Yes. Yes. It's heartbreaking, because it's not simply to me and to many other people that really enjoy Doctor Who, even to people that have only watched it casually. For those that discovered it, when you discover Doctor Who for the first time, you discover something magical, and you discover something that can, in my opinion, change your life, that can change your viewpoints on issues, that can change, at least, at the least, even if there are no issues involved, it broadens your imagination. There was something special and magical, some lightning in the bottle captured when Doctor Who was created, and revised again, and revised again, over and over, and continued to expand like a drop in the water, and all the ripples coming from that puddle that just keep growing and growing. But now some barriers, some coral reef or something has been, who knows? I mean, the image in my mind now is some, if it's in water, some type of pollution that's keeping it's funny because now there's a statement that next series there's going to be some episode dealing with ecology, with plastic or something. Not autons, but climate change, oceans or something. And I use that image as some barrier that's in the way of the puddle, the ripple effect that's now pushing it back, saying, no, the ripples have to be a different shape. No, it has to be a certain size. Can't be a circle, has to be a square. That maybe sounds too abstract. The point is some concept imposing itself upon the character of Doctor Who. And it breaks my heart, because you think that anything's impregnable, unsinkable, unstoppable in its progress. Some juggernaut like Doctor Who or Star Trek or Star Wars, you mentioned those other things. Well, we've seen what happens to Star Wars, and that has been practically stopped in its tracks, to the point where I used to live just a few miles from Disneyland. 4 years ago, I moved here to Utah. I'm seeing reports that the new Galaxy's Edge in Star Wars is a ghost town.
Oh, it's a disaster. From what I've been hearing, where this goes back to the Star Wars point, where I'm thinking that Episode 9 might perform even below Solo, because there's so much apathy. Nobody cares about this. It's the same thing with Doctor Who.
Yes.
Outside of a few people, there's almost no excitement for Series 11, and Doctor Who has stumbled before.
Yes,
season 24 is probably the best example, which prior to Series 11 was my least favorite season of Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, because John Nathan Turner, he didn't even want to continue as Doctor Who producer at that point. But they tried to do something different. They went into more of the absurdist science fiction era, and it was a complete disaster. But what did they do with season 25 and season 26?
Yes.
They listened to what the fans were saying.
Mm-hmm.
They did a complete turnaround, and season 26 is one of my all-time favorite Doctor Who seasons. I don't think we're going to see that with the current era, because as far as Chibnall is concerned, as far as the BBC is concerned, it's brilliant. No, it's not. And the argument that keeps coming up is, well, it had the highest ratings in the show's history. Well, The Woman Who Fell to Earth was something unique in Doctor Who history, and I gave it a chance.
Yes.
A lot of us gave it a chance.
I did too.
It's going to have high ratings because first female Doctor, complete change to the show. But what happened? Every week, the ratings went down up until the New Year's special, which had a slight spike. But every other season of Doctor Who, it's been up and down. This was the first series where they completely lost viewers as the season went on. And when it comes back, it's been gone for over a year. The mainstream audiences, a lot of them will have nothing to do with it. A lot of long-term Doctor Who fans are going to be boycotting it. The ideologues have already moved on to something else. I think what we're looking at is a complete catastrophe when Series 12 airs. And this will be the end of Doctor Who. And, you know, it being the BBC, maybe to save face, might keep it on for another year, but it's not going to be good.
No, I think it's very likely that I think that when I look at what's coming up for Series 12, I grant that we know very little, but what we know, or at least what is likely that we know, nothing that's appearing in terms of, okay, guess what's upcoming. I know that there has been a statement. You saw this wave of articles maybe last month or so, maybe in May, about Doctor Series 12. The BBC has listened, or maybe some people are saying that or not. But the point is, they're saying it will be more like the RTD and Moffat eras. Well, it can't be, because that's assuming that's saying they're saying it'll be like the RTD and Moffat eras. Well, are RTD and Moffat coming back to write some episodes? Are they coming back to help co-chair or co-run the series to re-inject that flavor? No, they're not. It's assuming that the assumption there is, because you will see old monsters, assuming we will, but it's beyond the Judoon.
Well, if the BBC forces it, which I think they are, that's why we had the Daleks, and I still feel bad for Nicholas Briggs being dragged into that.
Yes, and exactly, the whole assumption is, it's the most basic, in my opinion, too simplistic view of what makes good Doctor Who is, old monsters. It's anything that comes back. Some of the best series of Doctor Who did not have old monsters. We think of the Philip Hinchcliffe era.
Yep.
Yes, you had in Tom Baker's first year the Daleks and the Cybermen, but those were episodes that were commissioned by Barry Letts, and Philip Hinchcliffe did a wonderful job with them, but they weren't necessarily the stories he would have chosen.
Oh, he was. It's on record. He was less than happy of being left with that.
Exactly.
But he said, okay, I have no choice. I have to go with these stories. But he tweaked it in such a way which gave us something different. Like Genesis of the Daleks is probably the best Dalek story. So you can have, old villains and do something creative with them, or you can have old villains and do what Chibs is going to do and turn them into a complete mockery, like he's already done with the Daleks and probably the Judoon. And
in my opinion, it's almost worse, because you have the BBC, or maybe sources that are being fed stuff by the BBC, saying, guess what? Don't worry, it will be like it was before, when it will probably be the same thing. So therefore, in my opinion, it's a bit of sleight of hand. They're trying to prime the audience in a way, in my opinion, just prep them by saying, or at least lull them into a sense of complacency by saying, don't worry, it'll be the same. They were doing that at the end of the Moffat era a little bit by saying, not in terms of it'll be like the RTD era, but by saying this year will be bolder and darker and better than ever before. When it was, of course they're going to say that. It's the showrunners saying that. They're trying to say it'll be wonderful, it'll be better, it'll be better. And I still enjoyed the Moffat era towards the end, although I had some problems with it. The point is, here, it's almost a cheap trick, in my opinion, trying to say, it'll be like earlier eras. Well, it won't be, because those earlier eras are done. And you have completely new writers. I mean, I will tell you what makes me feel, honestly, that you're not going to see any change. In a nutshell, simply, it's because no one has left from Chris Chibnall's first year. No one has changed. It's the same people there, and it's intuitive. It's a no-brainer. Why would you change? You might. There is this argument that. And I don't know if this was a sign that some people maybe felt ultimately the Series 11 was not successful. But you've seen this from several people. I've heard it from people that I know a few, and you see this also. The fashionable thing to say now is that, well, even if the first year wasn't good, the second year of every Doctor is better than the first. Okay. Well,
and that I would actually I would dispute with Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi. They're
and John Pertwee.
Yep.
And John Pertwee.
Definitely John Pertwee. And
very much.
And maybe even to an extent Tom Baker, because Doctor Who exploded, like literally exploded during that first season.
Yes.
But I think one thing that we should add as well, when we're talking about Doctor Who being or going back to the way it was during the Moffat or Russell T Davies era. Chibs does not have the ability that either of those writers had. And I think RTD did it perfectly. Well, some missteps. Farting aliens 4 episodes in was not the best view, but Russell T Davies, I think at this point he was by far the best Doctor Who showrunner, because he managed to appeal to everyone, and he didn't stay around too long like Moffat. Whereas if I think had RTD stayed past the specials year, I think we should have seen a decline.
Yes.
Chibs does not have RTD's ability, and even as much as we rip apart Moffat, and it's very easy to do considering his story arcs and his final few series, but series 5, I still look at that as a work of genius.
Yes.
Chibs is not capable of writing at that level.
No.
In hell.
No, I think it's all, again, it's almost writing 101 in the sense of what you don't do. And I've taken a few creative writing classes. But I've heard across the board, which is don't do concept over character. You might have your characters set up, and if you're developing your characters, if for some reason you get into your head the idea, oh, I really, really, really want my characters to do this, but it goes completely against their character, then you should not go against the person's character, because you will get backlash. I think one good example of this was perhaps in general was the series Castle a few years ago with the Nathan Fillion and Stana Katic. Some concepts over a character that I think ultimately crippled the show was, well, we have the characters together. They clearly love each other. Let's get them together as a husband and wife. And then the concept was, well, let's keep pushing them apart just because, and who knows why, but this concept kept pushing into the series, which was, well, we have to separate the married couple. By the time we got to that last series, the Castle is a wonderful example of, I think, a terminal decline, because it happened, which was, and this is before any ideology, in my opinion, this is a few years ago, but a concept impressed itself upon the characters, and the concept destroyed the series to the point where the series fans, I was among them. I was a fan of Castle. Looking back, it taints the whole series, and I don't really enjoy the series anymore. But the point is, when fandom saw what the concept was of those last couple of years, in general being, let's find some artificial means to separate the husband and wife from being a unit, and by the last series, from not even working together. And I'm sure there were other issues involved. Maybe some people would say, oh, the actors are not getting along. Fine, maybe so. But that's almost pointless, because what you see on screen is what you see on screen. And the concept was, let's keep the characters separate. The fandom was the force that said, in the end, let's end the series. One extenuating circumstance was Stana Katic, left this, was going to leave the series after series 8. But fandom wasn't saying, oh, no, bring her back. No, fandom was saying, okay, in a way, good, because the series is going downhill, and we don't want the series to continue in a poorer context so that we have bad memories. We still have kind of bad memories. But finish the series, end the series, because the concepts have degenerated. I fear that's the push what's happening now with Doctor Who. And I really fear that's what's going to happen, because unlike, like we've talked about before, the end of the JNT era, I've spoken with you, I've spoken with a few other people that were, fans at the time. I was not, but when the series ended in 1989-90, there are some differing viewpoints on it, that maybe the BBC no longer cared, or the fans no longer cared as much. One person said the fans still cared, but they just did not, they loathed JNT. But in any case, there was a sense of everyone was on the same page. It's time to end it. In some way, to some extent, maybe not everyone was saying it, but more or less it was on the same page, BBC and fandom. Here now you have an opposition, almost an ideological opposition. You have the fandom kind of saying, to a certain extent in general, at least large portions, there is a problem. Not everyone's saying end the series, but they're saying there is a problem that could lead to the end of the series. The BBC is saying there is no problem, and we will continue the series forever, and it is the best it has ever been. When it is manifestly not, because the ratings have reached the point where it's almost at the levels of, as good as it was, season 26. You've gone from 10, 11 million viewers on average from the David Tennant years to, it might be on average, pretty good, but dropping down to what you were getting on average was about 5 million at the end of series 11. That won't be the official average viewer ratings figures for that series, but it was what you were getting in the last few episodes. A downward trajectory, a terminal velocity. I'm using that word for a reason. You can't sustain the series like this when you have poisoned your fandom, and your fandom, to a certain extent, is getting to the point where it wants the series to end because it's going to become something worse or boring, and you're no longer welcome. You can't have it when your fandom wants a series to end because, to a certain extent, because it feels that it's no longer the series that it knows. And you can't have a series to continue when the people making the series is actively saying anyone that disagrees with us is no longer welcome. We don't want you here. And it becomes unkind. And if Doctor Who, as Peter Capaldi's doctor was saying, should be kind, if it has become unkind, it is no longer Doctor Who. And I fear that it has become unkind and is no longer Doctor Who. It felt unkind to me again. Maybe what brought it home to me was in that episode, It Takes You Away, when a poor broken man that was doing reprehensible things for reasons of trying to recapture a chance to see his loved one again, another loved one, and he couldn't have both. Well, who do you choose? Your wife or your child? And you can't have both. And he's trying his best to have both. And the most quote-unquote compassionate being in the universe breaks his face. And the people that are learning from her want to break his face.
Yep.
It was disgusting.
That episode was one of the only times, generally with Doctor Who, even, when they have a bad episode, I get irritated.
Sure.
At that point, I had been irritated with Series 11. That was the first time I can say I was genuinely angry at an episode of Doctor Who. And this is coming from somebody that doesn't have kids. But it was an entire episode to crap on single fathers.
It was horrible.
And I think that's when they lost a lot of the fandom.
It may be so. It may be so because not everyone is going to agree, and some people will vehemently disagree with such a harsh statement and a blanket statement. And then that carried over into Resolution when the Doctor chastised
Ryan's dad. Yeah, I knew where that. As soon as there was a knock at the door, I could see where that was going.
Oh yes, because you knew. And I don't want to say this to. I say these things not to make this a bashing against anybody, or even against Jodie Whittaker or even Chris Chibnall. I am saying though that their creative and performative choices are alienating and even exiling. Well, they're exiling, perhaps saying, "Hey, get out of here," or opening the door for the exodus. There's exile and exodus in Doctor Who right now.
Yep.
And that is unsustainable for a series, and it's destructive. And I'm at the point now where I do not want this series to continue as it is.
Well, I've made the argument. I've been making it for the past 6 months. How do you fix Doctor Who at this point? You cancel Doctor Who at this point.
Yes.
We could have suddenly Chibs is fired, Series 12 is canceled. We could have another Philip Hinchcliffe.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to flop because people are that angry.
Yes. Being honest, people that know me, if I am very, very angry with where Doctor Who is now, I will say something. I think I have enough confidence to say that this is saying something. Because amongst people that know me and amongst the people in fandom, they know that I have a great enthusiasm and a love for Doctor Who. And I still have that love for Doctor Who in its previous years. That's why I'm making, to a certain extent, these few audios to recapture, to honor the memory of those that were a part of Doctor Who and loved Doctor Who for what it was. John Pertwee, Roger Delgado, even I would say Peter Butterworth, Nicholas Courtney. The men that were the icons, not just simply because they played a wonderful series, but because they were great men. And great women, the women that we've lost too, Debbie Watling, Caroline John, Mary Tamm, Elizabeth Sladen. It takes something, and it says something when you have a woman in her 60s willing to return to a program that she had played and then 30 years earlier for a whole generation of fans because she loved it.
And they're all doing it. Through Big Finish, I think almost, not all, but almost every single surviving Doctor and companion, well, all the surviving Doctors from the original series, and most of the companions, for very little money, mind you, because Big Finish is not a large company. No, they do it for the love of the show. Yes.
And that love of the show is something that I will always have. It's sad because I knew some people. I know one of that guy's name is Arnold. he probably was at the point where I am now, or at least very nearly, quite a while ago. He had a lot of, and when I say that, I mean, despite as much I love Series 5, he did not like Series 5. And so that gives you the context. At the beginning of the Moffat era, and I don't know all of his reasons, but he was left after the Moffat era, the beginning of the Moffat era, where most people, including myself, and I still feel was a great time, like as you do, Series 5. For whatever reason, Series 5 left him cold. And by the time you got to even before the 50th anniversary, he felt that Doctor Who was on a trajectory that he didn't like. Now, I don't know exactly why, because I didn't feel it was in a bad trajectory at that time. But looking back...
maybe there was a drastic tone change when we went to Series 5. So I can see why it was very different from the Moffat era. So I can kind of understand that a little bit. Sure. Where the show, longtime Doctor Who fans would have been used to this. But most long-term fans. But I think at that point, even though generally most fans like Series 5, it was very jarring. So I can see why some people may have distanced themselves.
Yes, I can see that too. Well, I remember now, one thing he didn't like certainly was the character of Amy Pond. He felt, I like Amy, but he brought up some very good points, which were similar points that he brought up about the revamped Uhura from the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films, which was... I
call her Super Uhura. She's in every
Uhura.
Scene.
Exactly, which was... It wasn't that she was a strong female character. It's that he felt that she, like Amy Pond, were very unethical. And that I can understand in the case of both women characters, in both of those female characters, that Uhura was browbeating Spock almost every chance she could get. Yes, they were in a relationship, but that doesn't mean that you are in a relationship. By being in a relationship, you get to browbeat your spouse. A relationship should be that of understanding, in my opinion. I think of my parents, of mutual respect and love, not, oh, I want what I want, I'm going to get it. Yes, of course you get what you want. In the case of Amy Pond, I think that my friend Arnold what he didn't like about her is that you could tell she was lying all the time about her feelings towards Rory, her boyfriend, eventual husband. Every time, and poor Rory took it. Although I liked, as I like the character, and so did my friend Arnold. Because he said, no, I like the character of Rory. I consider him almost like the Harry Sullivan in the new series. I really like him. I think he's very underrated. And yet you had Amy, who was always not browbeating him so much, but every time she made some statement where no one could hear, oh, this is the person I love, whenever she's asked, oh, did you mean Rory? Oh, yeah, of course, when you know she didn't. Now, I perhaps don't feel as strongly about Amy Pond in many ways that my friend did, but I think I'm half stating what I think was his viewpoint. But I can understand and at times agree.
And yeah, I got that. Well, it was while the episodes were airing as well, where there was a nasty side to the character. And then a few episodes in, she tries to jump the Doctor. Now, to Moffat's credit, he says that's his one biggest regret during his time as Doctor Who. If he had to do it over again, he would not have included that scene. But in some ways, Amy was redeemed at the end, where she was willing to give up everything to be with Rory. So that when I look back on it, it has mellowed me a little bit towards Amy, whereas Rose Tyler became more unlikable, just as an example, as it went on, and I thought was completely beyond redemption near the end. But Amy, I don't know, she was more realistic than what we'd see now. But Moffat made some mistakes, but to Moffat's credit, as much as we dump on the man, he has admitted that there were some mistakes made in the way he characterized Amy, where you'd never see Chibnall backtrack on anything.
No, no, because we haven't. And that may be indicative of where Doctor Who still is now, which is simply... This may sound odd, but I have a theory, a little bit of a theory of what's happening, and why I think that the terminal velocity is not going to reduce. Well, we live in ideological times, and we live in very polarized times, certainly in my country, and I think in other countries such as Britain, and maybe other European countries, but certainly you see that in my time. Maybe, I'm not sure how politically polarized or ideologically polarized, maybe in Canada, in your country.
Oh, it's our election this fall is going to be an absolute nightmare, but that's another story altogether. Sure. Oh no, we have one of the most hated prime ministers in our country right now. That's the short version of the story.
Understood. In any case, these are very polarized times. And so when you live in such polarized times, it's going to affect how you think, it's going to affect how certain people live and how they express themselves. I feel that Doctor Who and many of these others, perhaps some of these other series, perhaps Star Trek, perhaps Star Wars, but certainly Doctor Who. And I hope to talk about Star Wars before we go, but But Doctor Who, when Chris Chibnall before Series 11 aired, and coming into it, some people asked him why the Doctor was now a female. He made a statement that I think is very revealing. He said that Doctor Who has to stay ahead of the world. It has to stay ahead of the world and what the world is experiencing. And I think that was revealing in that the change of the Doctor from a male to a female was not an organic narrative reason, but an ideological reason, which is there are rights and there are issues and such, and those exist and those have great validity. But the ideology was now driving the series. Certain ideological moments that could be flashes in the pan. I'm not saying that to belittle or dismiss things that affect people, but the issues that are happening now may not be the issues which drive tomorrow. Tomorrow meaning maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, maybe 5 or 10 in any case. So they could become dated. The point is that when Chris Chibnall said that, he said, okay, ideology is driving the series. So we knew that, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. I think that it's not just simply an ideology that's driving it, but a sense of urgency, a sense of necessity, a sense of morality that is driving the ideology of Doctor Who, which is this. Because you have political and ideological polarity now. And not just simply that, but I'm going to say, at least Patrick Stewart once said, if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches the cold. I think that's true, and I think part of what's happening is what's happening in my country, which is that we have a president, Donald Trump. But not just simply because he's a more conservative or right-leaning president. It's because he's the president, and he is the ideology that was not meant to be, that was not meant to come into power, that no one thought would come into power. Whether or not you agree or disagree, whatever you feel about Hillary Clinton or left-leaning politics, when Obama was going out of office in this country, and I think in the rest of the world viewing this country, there was a sense of, whether or not you agreed, there was a sense that Obama will leave office and Hillary Clinton will be his successor.
She was anointed.
That she was anointed. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with her. It's just, she's bound to win. She is bound to win. And Donald Trump is a joke. Anyone else that opposes her is a joke because she is bound to win. And I think for some people, especially I would say those of us that agree with her politics, there was a sense of complacency. Don't worry, she will win no matter what. Well, she didn't. And suddenly Trump comes into power. More right-leaning politics come into power in this country and in other countries around the world. And in Britain, now this is where it affects Britain, because you had Brexit just a few months before, more quote-unquote, not necessarily only right-leaning, but not what you would expect to be left-leaning politics, prevailing on a major issue that affects that country. The BBC makes no secret that they are left-leaning. I say this not to belittle or bash anyone that's left-leaning, not at all. Because amongst my friends, myself and everyone, amongst us, we have a lot of left-leaning friends. But when you have a situation where you feel that you are living in a world where your way of life is threatened, and your viewpoint is descendant, an urgency often arises to tell the stories. If you are, in the case of BBC, to express take it from a more macroverse view. If a person feels that their way of life is threatened, as sometimes it is, and as they should at times, they will express their opinions often, depending on the person. They'll express themselves more clearly and more loudly and more frequently. The BBC has often, in certain years, because the government in Britain has been more of a conservative-leading government, you often hear some of its surrogates or the BBC or some of the actors involved, even, I will say Peter Capaldi said this, and I don't fault him for this, if he honestly feels this, that the BBC's existence has been threatened. And therefore, because of the conservative government. He stated this, that's on record. Other peoples have said that the BBC is threatened because of the British conservative government. Well, consider that on a global scale. What happens when you have a situation where you have a media outlet already feeling that its way of life or its ideology is threatened? What happens when that happens on a global scale? When America and other countries start taking quote unquote a more right-leaning approach, then my theory is that I feel that the BBC has begun to feel that it is their moral duty to push an ideology because they may feel that they may not be able to do that in the future, and that this is the time to do it because their viewpoints are threatened and will disappear forever. I don't feel that's the case because many of their viewpoints have validity and people will always agree with them, and they will survive and they will be all right. And so if I can give them any comfort is that you'll survive. But to finish this, I feel that that's what's happening to a certain extent. It's that because the BBC is now operating in a world post-Obama that is not quote unquote still left-leaning or continuing still progressive, but now from their perspective regressive, that there is a moral urgency to tell these more ideological stories because for whatever reason, for these reasons, because there's a feeling of a threat, there's a feeling of urgency. Now that's simply my theory, but I say it because, as an example, think of Mark Gatiss. When he was preparing to write his episodes for Series 10, he stated on record that he was going to write a sequel to the episode Sleep No More. But then when he found out that, or at least he implied when he found out that Series 11 would have no returning writers, so he would, essentially, probably he was told, you're not coming back. He scrapped the story that he was going to tell when things were calm. Oh, I have a future ahead of me. To telling the story that he wanted to tell, which was a good story. I'm not saying that, now this is not an ideological statement. I'm just saying that when an end was in sight, he changed his tactic, he changed his output and told the story that, oh, well, I won't have this chance again. I'm going to tell the story that I've always wanted to tell. I'm going to go out and tell, and he told the Empress of Mars, because he had always wanted to tell a story about ice warriors on Mars. I feel that in an ideological way, that's what's happening. That's what's happened to Doctor Who now, which is, for whatever reason, they've seen a political end, an ideological end in sight, and therefore everything has become urgent. This is a moral reason, and that is why do I say all that as a theory? That is why I do not feel that anything will change, because Trump is still the president, because Brexit is still happening, because there are right-wing leaning politics that are ascendant in other countries. Why would you, if you have an opposing style and you feel that your ideology is threatened, why would you soften your tone and change? You wouldn't. You won't. And I feel that's why I feel that Doctor Series 12 is still on a terminal freefall, because perhaps for quote-unquote good reasons or understandable reasons, the people in that series are telling the stories that they feel must be told, but from an ideological standpoint. And it's not going to change.
No, and actually, that's a point that I hadn't really considered before, but this stuff is not going to age well. And in terms of pushing their agenda, Doctor Who and, well, all their programming have become the sacrificial lambs, which really sucks. And yeah, and Noel just pointed out, look what happened to Gareth Roberts. So you speak out against this. Somebody who is a member of the LGBT community, just to add that point, spoke out against the narrative and was absolutely eviscerated. And what Gareth Roberts said, I don't agree with myself, but he has every right to say it. But if you even slightly give the slightest indication that you're going against the accepted narrative, then you're done. And I think that might also be part to play is why almost everyone across the board was turfed at the end of the Moffat era. They got rid of everyone. Yes. Where it's like Chibs says, okay, I want people that I know will toe the line. I don't need any risks. And the quality across the board has gone down, just not only in terms of stories, in terms of ideology, but visually the show looks like crap. The soundtrack is just droning noise, like it's horrific. So I think when you it makes sense when you're putting forth the idea that this is the BBC protecting or pushing their far right ideology as far as they can, And the result is Doctor Who is not Doctor Who anymore. It's the death throes, and it's not going to be the death throes. Anybody that knows anything about history is throughout human history, there's a left. The pendulum swings to the right, it swings to the left. Why we are seeing such a strong swing to the right, or at least we have since 2016, is because it went so far to the left in my country, which is now a leftist dystopia, is a perfect example of that. And then again, 10, 15 years, the pendulum will swing again, although hopefully the left will not be the left hate mob we have right now. It will be the traditional left or traditional liberalism, which was meant to be the party of regular people, where it's not now. It's parties, depending on what country you're looking at. It's the movement of identity politics. It's the movement of denouncing people based on their race and gender, which that is by definition hatred.
Yes, and it's very sad to see it. It's sad to see it because in the wake of these things, the things that were of our childhood or our youth or our adolescence or our life that are pure, that are fun, that in a way are, I don't want to use this term too flippantly, but in terms of personally, is almost a sacred thing, which is something that was something special where you could go and be yourself and feel safe, have been trampled and destroyed or corrupted to the point where they are no longer familiar. They are no longer safe. I mean, something like Doctor Who or Star Trek or Star Wars or some fiction, nothing escapes the ideology anymore. Or at least very few things are escaping the ideology. That's why I hope, as the optimism that I have, is that people will, if there is an urgency, if there is a necessity, people will be, new creators will say, okay, let's create something new. Maybe we'll start over again, create something new, which is a new place to be a child again, or to be safe again, or to be happy again, and somewhere you can grow and be yourself without worrying about the things of the world that sometimes don't always matter as much as you think. And that's why I still have hope for the future. Not so much right now, being honest, for Doctor Who. I think Doctor Who can return again. And I still hold out some hope, although I don't think so, but because it hasn't happened yet, or hasn't been released yet. And perhaps I'm naive, but I still have a glimmer of hope that Series 12 will have, because just by virtue of the fact that there is truth in the idea of you can get better, you can improve with repetition. That maybe there will be an episode or two, or maybe some, of Series 12 that hits the right note, that is simply a good science fiction story, or a good character piece, whatever it is. If it's exactly like Series 11, then no. But I still have some hopes. But but still, we talked about these things. We mentioned Star Wars Episode 9. If you want to, I know you have to go pretty soon, but
if we want to switch over, I'll leave that up to you. But yeah, I got to bounce in 20 minutes, and I know
sure.
you wanted to cover Star Wars. And if we run out of time, we can pick this up again as well.
Sure. Well, we have a few minutes. In the few minutes we have, I'd love to switch over really quickly, and maybe for the next time, really your thoughts about Star Wars Episode 9. I just want to know, what do you think about? I know a lot of people, when the teaser trailer, and we've only had the teaser trailer so far, it went over very well for the crowds that I saw at the Chicago Star Wars Fest. But what do you think about that trailer and its prospects, or what we'll get in Episode 9, based on what we talked about too before?
Any other Star Wars trailer, and and given my age, I've seen every Star Wars movie in the theater going to Return of the Jedi. I was much younger back then, but I do remember seeing it. So every other Star Wars movie, well, until Solo, but the prequel trilogy, The Force Awakens, for me and for a lot of people, the trailer was an event. It was like, holy crap, Star Wars is coming back. Solo, completely different story, but we'll put that aside for now. When I saw the trailer, it had no impact on me at all. And actually a good friend of mine, we went to see Endgame a few weeks ago again for the second time, and they played the Star Wars trailer. And my friend he's a lifelong Star Wars addict. And he actually got depressed because he's watching the trailer on the big screen. He's like, this is having no effect on me whatsoever. And that's where I am right now. Star Wars, to me, is dead. I've actually, and I've said this in other streams, I've watched The Last Jedi 8 times. And it's not because I like the movie. It's because it's become a fascination to me as to how Rian Johnson could have screwed up Star Wars in every way possible. It is a horrifically bad movie. And I went to see The Last Jedi in the theater. I had a week off, so I went to a matinee by myself. It was, I think, maybe 4 or 5 days after it was after release date. And I had avoided spoilers, although, on Twitter and a few other things, I'm like, okay, some people are not saying good things about this. I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to watch any videos. I'm going to go and judge for myself. So I'm watching it. I don't think I've ever been that pissed off walking out of a movie. And a year and a half later, that feeling is still there, where I don't care about these characters. I find the narrative that they're stretching to be, after The Last Jedi, somewhat loathsome. Rey, and it has nothing to do with the fact, like when they announced Rey with the first trailer, I didn't care that she was a girl, that Finn was black. It had no impact on me. But she's a blank slate. Like there's no character there. There's no charisma. You have a character like all the major plot threads set up by Abrams were finished in The Last Jedi. So why would we even want to watch Rise of Skywalker? It's like there's no excitement. We don't care about these characters. They've killed off Luke, although he'll be back as a Force ghost. They've killed off Solo or Harrison Ford. Will never have anything to do with it again. And Carrie Fisher is dead. So a completely wasted opportunity. And I think they're trying to throw everything at it, where they threw in the Palpatine laugh at the end. I'm like this is just pathetic. Like you literally have nothing to work with. So my feelings on the trailer and episode 9, I don't care. I am going to go watch it to review it for this channel. But other than that, I have no excitement for it whatsoever. And I'll probably need a few drinks before I go and see it.
Yeah, I don't drink, so I have no escape from that. It's funny. My feeling of the sequel trailers in the few minutes we have, we'll definitely want to talk. If you'll have me back again, I'll definitely want to talk about it more. Thank you. But my problem with the sequels definitely go back. As much as I dislike The Last Jedi, I dislike The Force Awakens equally.
And I've come to dislike it, and a lot of people have. Where we were Phantom Menaced again for the second time. But yeah, I'll let you go on, Chris.
Oh, well, sure. No, I'm glad you said that. It was funny. I love the original trilogy. I love the prequels. Believe it or not, I don't want to say a prequel defender because I don't talk about it much, but I love the prequels. I grew up with the prequels. And the sequels, it's the same problem I had. As much as I feel that Rian Johnson is, if he shares the blame in it, I feel that J.J. Abrams shares just as much blame, because I don't know how to say this. Going out of The Force Awakens, I had the same feeling I had going out of the first of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films, which was a sense that the past is, as much as they say, let the past die in Episode 8, I felt that the past, in a way, was dead in Episode 7, because both films do something. The Star Trek 2009 and The Force Awakens. They take what was before and present it in a new way that it looks flashy, it looks fast and bright, but it has also destroyed the past. Star Trek 2009, literally, because they tried to cover themselves afterwards by saying a different quantum reality, but by the rules of Star Trek and changing time at the time in the context of that film, Star Trek as we knew it, everything from the original series up until Enterprise, everything up until 2009 was gone. Because if you Star Trek, you go back in time and you change history. You change history. Now, obviously, that isn't the case because you have things like Picard, which are coming out, which are said afterwards. But the point is, for me, that hurt. But I also didn't like the story because I didn't like the villain. I'm talking about Star Trek 2009, so I didn't like Nero. And so, without going into details about that, in the interest of time, it simply left me thinking to myself, a lot of people sitting around me, and there were a few other people, one of my professors said the same thing. He said this, which I agreed. I'm having a hard time, at the time, enjoying this film as much as everyone else around me seems to enjoy it. But the same thing happened then by the time you get to Into Darkness, a lot of people maybe the enthusiasm had waned. People could look back on 2009 film and say, we don't like it that much. And then Into Darkness did not go over well. In fact, it went over pretty badly. And then by the time you get to Beyond, no one cares. So I've said this before. I feel that that trajectory is the same. And it again starts with J.J. Abrams. Of course, it's a little more palpable and I think a little more poignant with The Force Awakens, which was, well, they've taken what was a finished storyline and reopened it and reset it in ways that don't make sense. An empire that's risen again that's more powerful, a republic that exists.
No backstory. We have no idea what's happened in between.
Exactly. We have no idea what's happened in between. Now, some people will say, well, you don't know the backstory of Episode 4. Well, you don't need to know the backstory of Episode 4.
But it was at least explained.
And at least it was explained. And it is done in such an archetypal, very simplistic way that's much more powerful than simple, but it's done in such a George Lucas gave us enough in Episode 4 that you can understand the context. There's an empire and people are fighting it. And then you get the back history. He put you in the middle of the story at a point where you can understand the whole story in a way. Episode 7 puts us in the middle of a story that we don't understand. Because, and this is the problem that I feel is maybe the storytelling of J.J. Abrams' problem, which is J.J. Abrams, people are saying, oh, J.J. had all these stories, he had all this stuff and Rian Johnson ruined it. Maybe so, but you have to understand who J.J. Abrams is as a storyteller, and he has stated himself. His idea is the mystery box. It doesn't matter what the mystery is as long as you give it the box. He's not the man that explains the mysteries. So Episode 7 was classic JJ, and he gives you these things. You don't know what it is. It might look interesting. It might seem, oh, whatever. Although I don't think that the mystery boxes in Episode 7 were terribly interesting. But it is his storytelling. I feel that J.J. Abrams, and they've more or less stated this, I don't think that he had a storyline in place. I think he simply created a story, and then you move forward. And because if you're going to say, oh, Rian Johnson destroyed J.J. Abrams, well, J.J. Abrams was one of the executive producers of Episode 8. Are you telling me that he had no idea what Rian Johnson was ultimately producing?
Well, apparently the story goes that the script for The Last Jedi was actually finished before The Force Awakens, because I think Rian Johnson wrote it in one draft, or you look at the dialogue, it seems to be a one draft script. So I think it was also J.J. Abrams was trying to work his material into what Rian Johnson had written, hoping to hell that he wasn't going to do what he ended up doing. And now they're trying to retcon everything, which is another reason why I don't care about Episode 9. Yes.
In any case, whoever did what or which part, I think that the Star Wars sequels trilogies as a whole are a cautionary tale for how not to tell really a story, how not to plan a story, which is either have conflicting plans or no plan or no planning session. I don't know. In any case, so the results are you get a story, you get a second story which doesn't really go anywhere in terms of where the first one was going, if the first one was going anywhere at all, and a third story which is probably forced into a corner of retconning everything, but also by the sleight of hand that I talked about the BBC was doing in earlier years of, oh, it'll be bigger and better than ever before, or it'll be more like the RTD or Moffat era. Here it's, well, here's Emperor Palpatine. And I am sure, and here's Luke. I am sure we're also going to say by the time the episode comes out, well, there was Yoda, there was Padme, there was Anakin, there was, well, we know here's Lando. That's a given. We know there's Lando, we know there's Luke, we know there's Palpatine. I'm sure we'll see everybody else. But in a way, what does it matter? Well, I will tell you this. This isn't it's a spoiler, but it's not confirmed, is that we'll see Han Solo in a flashback.
Oh, probably.
Probably. We certainly will see Leia. All I'm saying is that it feels like a mess. But also at the same time, I also almost don't care, because Episode 7, in my opinion, started a story that they could have continued something with Star Wars, but I think that it restarted a story that didn't need to be told again, and it was restarted in a way that made no sense, and that's on JJ. What's on Rian Johnson is almost then just telling another story with a totally different tone that angered just about everybody. And what's on JJ now is finishing what he and Rian Johnson started. And I will be honest, I don't have the faith in J.J. Abrams to tell a story that is original and that is that will be in a way really good, because what's left? I think it just came. They tried to tell a story that came at the wrong time. There's a joke that I often tell, which is in the years I remember very vaguely. It was very small, and I saw a quote in a newspaper from Mark Hamill. when he was asked, will you come back for the prequels? Now, it makes no sense why you come back for prequels, but will you ever appear again? Maybe for sequels it would have been. And this is back in the long time ago, before the prequels came out. I was very small. But the point is, Mark Hamill joked and said, oh, yes, like George Lucas is going to bring us out in our wheelchairs and walkers saying, oh, may the force be with you, or something like that. But, at the time, Mark Hamill was only about 45.
Yep.
It's almost like, and they didn't bring them back when they were only about 45 or 50. Well, now that by the time they bring them back, they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they are coming out. Poor Billy D. Williams came out on stage in Chicago. He could barely walk. He's walking with the cane. It's like they waited to bring them back when they are in their walkers and wheelchairs and barely able to say, or they're dead. Like in the case of Carrie Fisher.
Yeah.
It's almost like the time to tell this type of story, whatever it would have been, is 10, 20 years ago. Not now.
It would have made sense 3 years after Revenge of the Sith, the 2005. 2008, I think, in terms of age, would have been the last chance where it would have made sense. Although Harrison Ford does not look his age, but everybody else does. Everyone
else does. Harrison Ford can still pull off. That's why I think he could still pull off Indiana Jones. I had no problems about him pulling off Indiana Jones, 10 years ago. I don't have any now because I think he could do it. I'm glad. I look forward to whatever they do. But so Harrison Ford, yes, but of course they killed off Han Solo. So I have to think about this more so I can articulate what I honestly feel about the trilogy. But ultimately, I pretty much feel where you do. It's one interesting thing I will state about Solo is that Solo's an interesting sacrifice or was a statement or whatever, because it's a year later and now there's a kind of a, I don't know how big it is now, but a couple weeks back I was seeing that there was kind of a Twitter's trend, which was make Solo 2, which is a year later. It almost seemed that some fans actually gave...
No. I think the reckoning is coming, because keep in mind, Solo flopped because people were angry at The Last Jedi, and it's nowhere. It's not a good movie, but it's nowhere near as bad as The Last Jedi.
No,
and people are still angry. Either they're angry or they don't care about Star Wars at all anymore. But Episode 9 will, because Solo not directly related to The Last Jedi. This is the direct sequel to The Last Jedi, so this is where people can really vent their frustration directly on the characters, directly on the storyline. I think it's going to be an absolute catastrophe. I could be wrong. I will admit if I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be a disaster.
I think it'll be a weird one. Yeah, I think fans are smart enough to see. I don't want to say if you don't see this, you're not smart. I will say that. How do I say this? I think that people are maybe aware enough or maybe experienced enough to see pandering storylines. And my fear is that Episode 9 will be a pandering storyline, but even deeper than that. Again, I go back to what I said the last time. What my best friend Phil said after watching Episode 8. He did not like Episode 7. He did not like Episode 8. But laying that aside, it's tying to what you said. What do you have left to work with? He said, "What more is there to tell?" And after Episode 8, I mean, it's almost ridiculous. One person in a video recently that I saw, and there's some a later review of it, said the last scene is so jarring of The Last Jedi because the last scene, quote unquote, well, at least with the rebels, because they're back to being the rebellion by the end of Episode 8. The few people, the 10 people that are still alive in the entire rebellion, are laughing and joking and hugging each other and clapping each other on the back and and saying, "Oh, we're still here," huh? When all their friends are dead. Everyone's been destroyed. And they say, "Oh, we have everything that we have here." Well, you just tried to rally the galaxy. Again, this is something that doesn't make sense at the end of The Last Jedi. Excuse me. And then they send out a call, and no one listens. That was... Episode 7 has its own reasons. I definitely want to get into this more, but Episode 7 has its own reasons that don't make sense. Episode 8 has its reasons that don't make sense, which is if the First Order is ascendant and rising and supposedly rules and reigns, why doesn't anybody care? No one seems to care.
Nope.
So Episode 9, I think, is going to likely will have its own brand of this doesn't make sense. Because now it has to retcon what came before and then finish. It has its own burden, which is being the final story. But it's not the final story. It's essentially the first story, Mark 3. because episode 7, in my opinion, didn't really, and I think most people reevaluated it. I didn't like it at the beginning. Episode 7 didn't work out as a starting point. Episode 8 didn't work out as a restarting point, middle story. What's episode 9 going to be? I don't know. Honestly,
resetting back to the beginning.
Resetting back to the beginning. And that's the sad thing, because I think almost Star Wars has become its own Ouroboros. It's consumed itself. At least whatever you say about the prequels, and I love the prequels, but I think even people that dislike the prequels are still saying now, in the wake of these last episodes, that at least the prequels told their own story and expanded the universe. What can I say that's expanded about Star Wars in episodes 7 and 8? We have a rebellion, we have an empire, we have a Death Star, we have people getting killed, we have another low point, we have another... The working theory is that Snoke is a clone of the Emperor. I hope he is, because that's the only thing that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, it's horrible. I look forward to the days when creativity is no longer concerned for its safety, or concerned or complacent about its longevity. I look forward to the days when creativity simply creates and ends itself.
And so, as I was telling everybody at the beginning of the stream, I've got to get to a work meeting, so I have to bounce. But Chris and I are going to be back to continue our discussion. We won't go 6 months this time. We'll go probably a couple weeks, maybe a week. And Noel from the TARDIS Zone and Tharis are going to be joining me later in the week. We just have to set up the exact time. So keep an eye on Twitter. I'm also going to be doing a live stream on this channel with Gary from Nerdrotic as well. So look forward to that soon. And as we've got 1 minute, Chris, any closing words?
Yes. Look forward to thank you for having me again. I look forward to speaking again. And the things I'm doing, if I'm going to plug anything, look forward to Roger Delgado's Centennial story and the telling of his final adventure, the final game. Look forward to another meeting between the Hartnell Doctor and Butterworth Monk in the Misshapen Planet. Look forward to a centennial celebration of John Pertwee's Doctor in the Veiled Memory, where he meets the Master, but I won't say which one. And as a tease, look forward to something very special in the near future, honoring Nicholas Courtney's memory as the Brigadier. So look forward to that. Whatever that is. It may simply be a talk about Nicholas Courtney and his life, but to look forward to something special there. In any case, look forward to good times ahead in times that are wonderful. So thank you.
Okay, awesome. And so we're going to go out here in a second. So as always, everyone, thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to both YouTube channels. This is my main one if you haven't already. And I shall see you later this week as soon as I can find my mouse. There we go.